3 months after our divorce was finalized, my ex-husband filed a custody petition full of fabricated dates and invented incidents branding me an unfit mother, all to force leverage over the house my father had left to me alone. My name is Colette Fenwick, and before this happened, I believed I understood the people I trusted and the life I had built. My attorney forwarded me the petition on a Tuesday afternoon that should have been ordinary. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock over the stove. I had just finished clearing the lunch dishes when my phone buzzed with the message that would pull the floor out from under me. It came from Priscilla Nakamura, the family law attorney I had hired 3 months earlier when my divorce from Desmond finally became official. Her email subject line was calm, almost bland, the kind of line that would not alarm anyone who did not already know how dangerous these papers could be. Custody modification petition received. For a moment I just stared at it. Then I opened the attachment. I remember the exact sensation of that first page, that strange cold heat that moved up my neck as my eyes ran across words that described me as if I were a stranger. The petition alleged that I was an unfit mother because of ongoing substance abuse, neglect, erratic behavior, and repeated instances of putting my children at risk. It was detailed in that polished legal way that makes lies look almost respectable. Specific dates, specific incidents, specific descriptions of what I had supposedly done. According to that document, I had driven the children while impaired on a Thursday evening in May. I had left my youngest unsupervised at home on a date when I knew I had been at the preschool pickup line. I had missed appointments, forgotten meals, become emotionally volatile in front of the kids, and displayed a pattern of instability serious enough to justify changing custody. None of it had happened, not one thing. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop still open from work and read the same paragraph 3 times because I could not quite make my mind accept what my eyes were seeing. The petition was written in such a way that if you did not know the truth, if you did not have the mundane proof of your own life spread out in front of you, it might have sounded plausible. That is what made it so nauseating. Not that it was dramatic, but that it was careful. I knew immediately that panic would not help me. The one thing I had going for me was that I knew I had done nothing they claimed. The next thing I needed was proof. So I took a long breath, sat back, and started reading like a woman building a defense instead of a victim waiting to be rescued. I am 34 years old, and 3 months earlier I had finalized my divorce from Desmond Halloway after 8 years of marriage. We had 2 children together, a 10-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son, and the divorce gave me primary custody. It also gave me full ownership of the house my father had left to me in his will. That house mattered more than Desmond had ever admitted out loud. It sat on a quiet street on the edge of town, with a wide front porch and a backyard my children had practically grown up in. My father had bought it 40 years ago, when he was still just a young man with calloused hands and no idea what his life would become. He had turned it into a real home through decades of work, repairs, and stubborn pride. It was where I had learned to ride a bicycle, where my mother had once planted the lilacs that still bloomed every spring, where my father had taught me how to hammer a nail straight and how to stand up for myself without apology. When he died, he left the house to me, specifically and unambiguously. Not to our children, not to the family as a whole, to me. Desmond had never had any legal claim to it. He had lived there for years, of course, and he had acted as though that made him entitled to it. He had invested sweat, money, and resentment into the place, and he had not forgiven the fact that my father's will never left room for him to argue otherwise. After the divorce, when he moved out, I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. At first I only read enough to know what kind of danger I was in. Custody cases are not fought on truth alone. They are fought on evidence, on credibility, on patterns. If someone stands in front of a judge and says you are unstable, the court does not shrug and send them away because you protest. The court asks for records. The court asks for documentation. The court asks whether the children are safe. And if the accusation is detailed enough, it can do damage even before it is proven false. That was what Desmond was counting on. By the time I finished the petition, my hands were steady again. But it was a hard steadiness. The kind that comes after shock has hardened into resolve. I printed every page, highlighted the specific dates, and started making a list. 1 column for the allegation, 1 column for the actual facts, 1 column for whatever documentation could kill the lie. Then I called Priscilla. She answered on the second ring. I got the filing too. Her voice was controlled but not casual. That was one thing I liked about her. She never wasted energy pretending a crisis was smaller than it was. He filed 3 months after the divorce, I said. I know. Did you read it? line by line. And he's either delusional or he thinks you don't keep records. I looked at the stacks of paper already on my table, the folders I had never thought I'd need. I keep records. Good, she said. Then we fight this the right way. Don't call him. Don't text him. Don't send emotional messages. Save everything. I want every work schedule, every pickup log, every appointment calendar, every receipt you have that can establish time and location. He made up all of it. I believe you, she said. The court will need more than belief. That was Priscilla in one sentence. No sentimentality, no false comfort, just the exact next step. Before I went to bed that night, I had already pulled up months of work emails, paycheck records, daycare sign-in sheets, school calendar reminders, and bank statements. I slept badly, waking every hour with the same thought circling in my head. He was trying to take my children from me, not just hurt me, not just punish me for leaving, take the children, and, somehow, the house too. The next morning, I dropped the kids at school and drove straight to Priscilla's office with a flash drive and a binder so thick it barely closed. Her office was on the third floor of an older brick building downtown, and she had the sort of room that told you a lot about the kind of lawyer she was. No art on the walls except framed certificates, no decorative clutter, just neat stacks of files, a spotless desk, and a row of law books that looked actually used. She motioned me into the chair across from her and opened the petition again. Let's start with the May 12 allegation, she said. I leaned forward. That's the driving one. Yes. He claims you picked the children up from school, spent the evening drinking, then drove them home while impaired. I let out a hollow laugh. I was at work until 6:30 that night. Do you have timekeeping records? Yes. And emails. And a meeting invite with a timestamp. She nodded and wrote it down. Good. Now the next one. We went through each accusation with a cold, surgical focus. The alleged missed pickup in April, the supposed day I left our son alone, the claim that I had forgotten to feed the children until late at night, the vague line about frequent emotional outbursts witnessed by third parties, which was the kind of phrase lawyers use when they want to sound ominous without actually saying anything provable. For every claim, there was a real day, a real record, a real chain of events that contradicted it. The April pickup? I had signed our son out of preschool, in front of 2 teachers and the security camera by the entrance. The missed dinner? I had a grocery receipt, a text exchange with my sister, and a photo of the kids eating spaghetti at the kitchen table. The emotional outburst? I had been in the waiting room at the pediatrician with my daughter, who had strep throat, while Desmond was supposed to be at work. Priscilla sat back after nearly an hour. He didn't just make broad allegations, she said. He built a timeline. Can he do that? He can try. That's why we're going to prove the timeline impossible. Her eyes stayed on mine for a second longer than necessary. This looks like somebody had access to your routine, someone who knew your schedule or had some source close to it. I thought of the petition, the way every lie had just enough detail to feel sourced rather than invented. Desmond didn't know that stuff on his own. That's what I think too, she said. I'm going to bring in a private investigator. Her investigator was named Marisol Vance. She was in her 40s, with a patient face and the kind of practical intelligence that makes people underestimate you until it is too late. She met us 2 days later and listened while Priscilla explained what we were looking at. Marisol flipped through the petition once, then twice, then set it down. This is personal, she said. How personal? I asked. Personal enough that someone wanted the claims to sound rooted in your actual life. It's easier to make a lie believable when it borrows the shape of the truth. That sentence stayed with me. Marisol spent the next several weeks doing what she did best. She followed paper trails, she checked public records. She interviewed people who had only half noticed what was happening around them. She called me with updates that were never dramatic but always useful. Your ex has been in contact with someone at the preschool, she told me one afternoon. Who? Odalise Farrow. I knew the name immediately. She worked at the children's preschool, not as a teacher but in the office and pickup coordination. She had the kind of mild, smiling presence that made parents wave to her without ever thinking too hard about her. I had spoken to her dozens of times over the years, always politely, never closely. Why does that matter? I asked. Because she has access to pickup schedules and daily information about parents' routines, and because Desmond's contact with her started almost immediately after the divorce was final. I felt my stomach drop. You're saying she's helping him. I'm saying she had the information he would need if he wanted to build a false case around your schedule. Priscilla asked the next question before I could. Can we prove contact? Not directly unless we subpoena records or get someone to talk, Marisol said. But there's enough to show a pattern. They've had repeated calls, messages, and a few meetings in places that aren't school-related. I stared at the pen in Priscilla's hand while she wrote. Why would Odalise do that? Marisol glanced at me before answering. People do reckless things for all kinds of reasons. Loyalty, resentment, money, wanting to feel important. Sometimes they don't understand the consequences until they're already in too deep. That was the first time I heard the shape of the bigger story. Desmond's petition was not just bitter, it was strategic. Priscilla explained it to me in the clean, precise language of someone used to translating family conflict into legal risk. Your father's house was awarded to you as separate inherited property, she said, tapping the page. That part is safe unless somebody can make a case for a major change in circumstances or attack the original agreement itself. He can't, I said. Not directly, but if he can convince a court that you're unfit, he can seek a custody modification. And if he gets the children's primary residence shifted to him, he can argue for a broader reconsideration of the economic arrangement, or at least use the custody outcome as leverage. I frowned. Why would that matter? The house is mine. Because people don't always go after property the front doorway. Sometimes they come through the side. If he wants control over the house or wants to force a settlement advantage, he may be betting that a finding of instability gives him bargaining power. The idea made my skin crawl. Desmond had always been good at resentment. He could look wounded without seeming weak, and he could turn his own disappointment into someone else's moral failing. During the last year of our marriage, after my father died and the will was read, he had not shouted or demanded anything outright. He had simply become colder. Every repair in the house became an argument. Every suggestion that we should move someday became a silent accusation. He liked to remind me how much of our family life was built around the place, as if that made it half his. When the divorce happened, he hated losing the house almost more than he hated losing me. I had thought that was bitterness. Now I could see the outline of something more dangerous. He was not just trying to hurt me, he was trying to build a legal path back into my life using my children as the mechanism. The thought made me furious, but it also made me careful. Fury is useful when it gets you moving. It is dangerous when it takes the wheel. So I did what Priscilla told me to do. I gathered every document. I turned my daily life into evidence. I printed my work calendar from the last year. I downloaded location history from my phone. I pulled preschool records, doctor visit summaries, grocery receipts, gas station transactions, even a bank record showing an automatic payment I had made during one of the dates he had lied about. I was not trying to overdo it. I was trying to create an unbroken line of reality that could not be easily twisted. There is something humiliating about having to prove you are a good mother, not because you are secretly not one, but because the question itself implies that your love, your habits, your whole ordinary life might be reducible to a checklist filled in by someone who wants to harm you. I hated every minute of it. But I hated the alternative more. Desmond's lawyer, unsurprisingly, did not back away when confronted with the evidence. Instead, they pushed forward and asked for a temporary custody review, claiming the petition had enough substance to warrant immediate evaluation. That was the part that made me most afraid. Not because I thought the allegations were true, but because systems move slowly and children live inside those delays. Priscilla filed a formal response that same week. She did not just deny the allegations. She dismantled them. She attached my time records. She attached the preschool sign-out logs. She attached my work emails showing me in meetings, the grocery receipts, the pediatrician appointment notes, the doctor's office voicemail confirming my presence, and a sworn statement from my sister confirming she had been with me on one of the dates in question. Then she requested a full custody evaluation by an independent psychologist. If he's lying, I said when she told me, won't the judge see that from the records? Eventually. But a custody evaluator gives us another layer, she said. And if the petition is false, a neutral report will help us show the court exactly how false it is. I nodded, though I already knew the next few months would be miserable. They were. The court appointed an independent psychologist to evaluate both parents and both children. The evaluator was thorough, professional, and impossible to charm, which I appreciated. Still, the process forced my children into a confusing world of interviews, observation, and questions they were too young to fully understand. I told them the truth in the gentlest possible way. Mommy and Daddy are having disagreement problems, I said one night while brushing my daughter's hair. So there are some grown-up people helping us figure out the best schedule for everyone. My son, who had been building a tower of blocks on the rug, looked up and asked, "Are we in trouble?" My throat tightened. No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. Nobody is in trouble. He accepted that, because 7-year-olds can accept almost anything if the tone is steady enough. My daughter, who was 10 and old enough to sense what I was not saying, was harder. She watched me for a long moment and then asked quietly, "Is Daddy mad at you?" I could have lied. It would have been easier. Instead, I chose honesty that she could carry without being burdened by adult detail. Daddy and I are both upset, I said. Sometimes when adults are upset, they handle it badly. That does not mean you did anything wrong. She nodded once, but her mouth tightened in that particular way that told me she understood more than she should have had to. During the evaluation period, Desmond acted as though he were the reasonable one. He sent brief, polished messages through the parenting app. He made sure every communication looked calm if anyone were watching without context. But Marisol kept uncovering small things that did not fit the image. He was falling behind on rent. His apartment was in rough shape financially, and he had already received notice that eviction was likely if he did not catch up soon. That detail changed the texture of everything. The custody petition was not just an act of revenge, it was a strategy to create leverage, maybe even a desperation move to force me into giving up money, house access, or some version of security he no longer had. That was the moment I understood how broad his reach actually was. He was not content with the breakup. He wanted to reverse the parts of it that had cost him status and comfort. He wanted my house. He wanted the appearance of moral superiority. And if he had to smear me in court to get there, he would do it. Priscilla called me into her office after Marisol completed a major report. She slid a packet across the desk. Read the summary. I scanned the first pages and stopped halfway through the second. He was contacting Odalis after the divorce, repeatedly. Why didn't I notice? Because you trusted ordinary life to stay ordinary, she said. Most people do. I kept reading. Marisol had pieced together a pattern of messages and calls that lined up with days when Odalis would have had access to scheduling information and confidential pickup habits. There were enough overlaps to suggest she had fed Desmond details he would not have known otherwise. Can we use this? I asked. Absolutely, Priscilla said. It goes to credibility and motive. I looked up. Will it matter? It will matter when we present the whole picture. False allegations plus access to private school information, plus financial distress plus a custody petition filed 3 months after the divorce. That is not a protective parent. That is someone using the system. I wanted to cry, but mostly I wanted to break something. Instead I asked, what happens next? We prepare for the hearing. We submit all documents. Then we let the evaluator do their job. The hearing itself was not dramatic in the way television would make it seem. It was worse than that. It was procedural. The judge listened. Lawyers spoke in controlled voices. Evidence was handed up. Every lie had to be translated into legal language and then answered in the same language. Priscilla stood beside me and went through the allegations one by one. On the date alleged in paragraph 6, Ms. Fenwick was at work until 6:30 p.m., she said, holding up the timesheet. Here are the electronic clock-in records, her supervisor's corroborating note, and the email chain confirming her presence in an active meeting. Desmond's lawyer objected to a few things, but objections do not erase facts. Then came the preschool pickup claim. The record shows Ms. Fenwick signed out her son at 3:14 p.m. Priscilla continued. The school has no evidence she left him unsupervised at any point. Then the allegation about the evening drinking incident. Priscilla produced bank statements and receipts showing I had been at a pharmacy picking up children's medicine and then home with the kids until bedtime. The judge's face changed as the pattern emerged. Not because judges enjoy being proven wrong, but because a pattern of falsehoods is different from a single disputed event. A single mistake can be explained. A string of specific documented lies starts to look deliberate. Marisol's findings about Odalis were entered next, carefully and with a professional tone. Priscilla did not accuse anyone of crimes she could not prove. She did not overreach. She simply showed the contacts, the access, and the suspicious timing. Then she addressed Desmond's financial situation. We are not suggesting poverty is itself relevant to custody, she said. We are suggesting motive. The petitioner has every incentive to fabricate instability in order to reopen a financial arrangement that previously resolved in Ms. Fenwick's favor, including the inherited residence of her late father. That line landed hard. I watched Desmond's expression tighten for the first time. He had expected a messy defense, not a disciplined demolition. The judge ordered the custody evaluation to continue. I knew then we were not done, but I also knew Desmond's confidence had begun to fracture. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I worked during the day, answered evaluator appointments, shuffled children between school and home, and tried to keep the atmosphere in the house as normal as possible. I made dinners, I checked homework, I read bedtime stories, I braided my daughter's hair and fixed my son's blanket and smiled when the only thing I wanted to do was stare at the wall. Every so often, I would catch sight of my own reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I felt like a person split into two versions. One was the mother making sandwiches and packing backpacks. The other was the woman in a legal battle over whether she was fit to raise her own children. The evaluator interviewed me for nearly 3 hours on one occasion. She asked about my routines, my support system, my childhood, my mental health, my drinking, my stress, my parenting style, my relationship with Desmond, and the impact of the divorce. I answered carefully and honestly. "Do you ever drink?" she asked. "Occasionally. A glass of wine with dinner sometimes, maybe once or twice a month. Never when I'm responsible for the kids alone in a way that would impair me. Have you ever used illegal drugs?" "No." "How would you describe your emotional regulation?" I almost laughed at the clinical phrasing. "I get angry like anybody else. I do not take that out on my children." She wrote something down. I wanted to ask her what Desmond had said about me, what lies he had tried to make sound like truth. But the evaluator was careful not to let me frame the interview around him. This was about me, my behavior, my home, my routines, and the children's welfare. That was fair. I found out later that Desmond was not making a good impression. His answers were inconsistent. His timeline changed slightly each time he was asked to repeat it. He sounded less concerned about the children than about how the divorce had left him with nothing, which was not a great look when you are trying to convince a court that your children's safety is your main concern. It was around that time that Marisol came back with the clearest piece of the motive puzzle. She met Priscilla and me in the conference room, laid a final stack of notes on the table, and said, "He's behind on rent by more than 2 months. Landlord's already started eviction paperwork." I blinked. "He never said anything." "Of course he didn't," Priscilla said. Marisol continued. "He's been trying to find a way to stabilize himself, and the house is the obvious target. He doesn't have a legal claim to it, but if custody shifts or if he can pressure you through a court process, he might think he can force some kind of negotiation." I felt anger flare again, but now it was grounded. "So this was always about the house." "At least in part," Priscilla said. "Using the children as leverage," I said. Neither of them contradicted me. That silence was answer enough. When the evaluator's report finally came in, Priscilla called me immediately. "You need to sit down," she said. I was already seated by then, on the edge of my bed with the laundry basket beside me. "What does it say?" "It says there's no evidence supporting his allegations. It says your parenting is stable. It says the children are bonded with you and doing well. And it notes in professional language that the specificity and pattern of the allegations are consistent with deliberate fabrication." I closed my eyes. I had been braced for relief, but what I felt first was exhaustion so deep it made my bones ache. Then came the relief. Then, beneath it, rage. Desmond had not just accused me of being a bad mother. He had tried to weaponize a court process to rewrite the story of our family. He had dragged our children into interviews, forced strangers to ask them questions about a problem he invented, and made them sit in the emotional blast radius of his lies. Priscilla did not let me spiral there. "The report helps us enormously," she said. "The judge is going to have a hard time ignoring this." She was right. At the final hearing, the court dismissed Desmond's petition entirely. I remember the sentence almost word for word, because it felt like a locked door finally opening. The judge found the petition to be filed in bad faith. He noted the complete lack of evidentiary support. He referenced the documented falseness of each specific allegation. He said that using fabricated claims of parental unfitness to manipulate custody or property outcomes was a serious abuse of the legal system. And then, because Priscilla had asked for it, and because the judge clearly had no patience left for Desmond's nonsense, the court ordered him to pay the full cost of my legal fees and the custody evaluation. I did not look at Desmond when the ruling was read. I kept my eyes forward and let the words land where they needed to land. The petition was dismissed. The accusation had failed. The story he wanted the court to believe had been rejected in the open, on the record, by the very system he had tried to manipulate. The courtroom did not erupt. That would have been too cinematic and too kind. Instead, there was a quiet, almost stunned pause, the kind that follows a decisive ruling. Desmond sat stiffly with his mouth pressed into a line, and I could tell he was already calculating what to do next, because men like him rarely know how to surrender gracefully. But he had lost. Not in theory. In fact, afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Priscilla put a hand lightly on my arm. "You did well," she said. I gave her a tired look. I sat there. "You kept your head. You saved every record. You let the evidence speak." I thought about all the nights I had stayed up sorting through receipts and calendars, how ridiculous it had felt at the time. Now it felt like survival. The judge did not stop there. Since the case had been filed in bad faith and used the children as leverage for a separate goal, the court also approved a reduction in Desmond's parenting time. It was not a punishment for its own sake. It was a recognition that someone who had weaponized custody paperwork against the other parent had shown a willingness to misuse access to the children in service of his own agenda. I was not happy about reducing his time because I wanted to punish him. I was relieved because the court finally saw what he was. For the children's sake, I did not pursue any additional litigation after that. Priscilla asked me once whether I wanted to consider a civil action for the harm to my reputation or any claims tied to the false filing itself. I thought about it for a while. Then I said no. Why not? She asked. Because I want this to be over, I told her. I want the children to have a life that is not defined by one more round of adult warfare. He has already been sanctioned. He lost the petition. He's paying my fees. That is enough. Priscilla studied me for a second, then nodded. That is a reasonable position, she said. And a hard one. It was hard. Harder, in some ways, than fighting. Because it meant accepting that some people never feel the weight of what they have done in the way you want them to. It meant choosing peace over the satisfaction of further punishment. The children felt the change before they understood it. The house got lighter once the legal uncertainty lifted, but the aftershocks took time to settle. My daughter became quieter for a while. My son started asking more questions about where people lived, who owned what, and why grown-ups fought over papers. Children notice tension even when adults think they are hiding it well. They feel the weather before they can name the storm. One evening, after the evaluation ended and the judge's ruling was final, my daughter came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. "Mom? Yes?" She leaned against the counter, arms folded in front of her. Why did Daddy say those things if they weren't true? I dried my hands slowly. Questions like that deserve answers careful enough not to become burdens. Sometimes, I said, when people are scared about their own problems, they do very unfair things. They can tell themselves a story that makes them look better, even when it hurts someone else. She looked at me, trying that out for size. Did he think it would work? I think he hoped it would. Her face pinched. That's mean. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Yes, it was. She nodded, satisfied by the blunt honesty. My son, on the other hand, mostly cared whether dinner was still happening on time and whether he could keep the same soccer schedule. At 7, he was more practical than philosophical. That was lucky. He had enough to worry about without borrowing adult bitterness too early. The preschool eventually terminated Odalis Farrow's employment. I learned that secondhand through a parent who knew someone on staff. I did not call to ask. I did not try to be involved. I had no interest in turning the school into a battleground. But when the information came to me, I did not feel sorry for her. She had chosen to share confidential pickup and scheduling details with a parent who was using them to support a fabricated legal claim against another parent. That was not a small lapse in judgment. It was a betrayal of trust. People often underestimate how much damage a quiet act can do when it is tucked inside someone else's lie. In the weeks after the ruling, Priscilla and I debriefed a few final details. She told me that cases like this were not as rare as people think. Parents, ex-spouses, family members, and sometimes new partners all knew how much power a custody accusation could carry. Some used that power honestly, others used it like a knife. The ones built on property disputes are especially ugly, she said. People will dress up greed as concern all day long if they think it will improve their odds. And this happens often? Enough. She folded her hands. What saves the falsely accused parent more often than not is what you did. Records. Calm. Specific rebuttal. Do not argue the feeling. Prove the fact. I looked at the file folder on her desk with my name typed neatly on the tab. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who had to do this. No one does, she said. That was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. I still have my father's house. I still have the backyard where my children run barefoot in summer and where my own memories live in the corners of the lawn. I still have the porch where my father used to sit with his coffee on Saturday mornings, watching the neighborhood wake up. I still have the old kitchen with its slightly uneven floor and the pantry door that sticks when the weather turns humid. The house is not just a piece of property. It is a record of the people who loved me before I had any reason to defend myself. Desmond's petition never came close to taking it, but I know now that was the point. He was building a route around the obvious. He could not claim the house directly, so he tried to destabilize me. He could not claim my inheritance, so he tried to argue that I should not be trusted with the children who lived in it. He could not win the divorce on the terms he wanted, so he tried to invent a new reality in which I was too broken to keep what my father had left me. I keep the original petition in a folder with the rest of the case documents. I do not look at it often, but I have not thrown it away. I suppose I keep it for the same reason people keep old maps after the road has changed. Not because they want to go back, but because they want to remember exactly how they got through. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep, I take the folder out and skim the pages again. The lies still look outrageous to me, but I can also see the craft in them now. That is part of what makes them ugly. They were not random. They were made to exploit a system that takes accusations seriously for good reason. What Desmond failed to understand was that truth also has a structure. It has timestamps, it has pickup logs, it has payroll records and school records and bank receipts and pediatrician notes and photos on a phone and witnesses who remember what happened because ordinary life is full of people and details and small, stubborn facts. Truth is not always loud, but it is often organized. On warm evenings now, I sit on the back porch while the children chase each other across the grass. The air smells like cut clover and sun-baked wood. Cicadas hum in the trees beyond the fence. Sometimes my daughter asks me to watch her cartwheel, and sometimes my son tries to show me some elaborate soccer move that mostly ends in him tripping over his own feet. I laugh more easily now than I did during those months of waiting. That does not mean I forget. It means I remember without being ruled by it. I think about my father often, especially when I am standing in the kitchen where he used to stand. Or when I hear the back door slam the way it always did when one of us kids came running in from outside. I wonder what he would have made of the whole thing. An ex-son-in-law trying to use fabricated claims of unfitness to reach the house he left specifically to me. A courtroom sorting through lies and paperwork and motives. A daughter forced to prove, item by item, that she was exactly the mother she had always been. I cannot know for sure what he would have said, but I think he would have hated the arrogance of it. I think he would have been furious that anyone tried to turn his gift into a weapon against me. And I think he would have been proud that I did not fold, not because I was fearless. I was not. Not because I enjoyed the fight. I did not, but because I did what needed to be done, one verified fact at a time, until the story Desmond tried to tell collapsed under its own weight. The house is still mine. The children are safe. The court saw through the scheme. And the man who tried to have me declared unfit to take what my father left me ended up exposing, in the process, exactly how far he was willing to go when he thought greed could dress itself up as concern.